All right, everyone, welcome to the workshop. Maybe some of you know me or maybe not. I'm the coordinator of the courses for business skill development, but it is very much my pleasure to introduce the host of today's workshop, or our guest speaker, host facilitator, Andrea Cagnato, who does voice, obviously, and a lot of other things that will get your thinking going. Hopefully. We're mighty glad to have him here to be able to deliver his expertise to all of you. So I hope you enjoy these next 2 days with him, or at least 2 sets of parts of the day. And yeah, off to Andrea.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me first and foremost thank Professor Czerne and the Center for Business Excellence for their invitation. Very glad to be here. It's actually my first time here in Ljubljana. And hey, I'm told the city is beautiful and I will definitely use this opportunity to visit it thoroughly. I'm here to talk about the importance of the voice variable as a personal branding tool. That's what I will be discussing today. And I will do this by taking a very, very different approach from what you might be used to. The word voice appears very, very frequently in materials advertising public speaking training. Public speaking skills are, of course, a very important tool in a professional's toolbox. Soft skills, communication, and so on and so forth. So you might expect people who do and teach public speaking to do a lot of voice work. And they do and they don't. I would love, in general, this to be an interactive lecture. I will be following a PowerPoint presentation, yes. I will be delivering a lot of content. But I would be very happy to have questions and objections from you, because I know for a fact that many of you have been taught things about the voice in general and its role in public speaking, and you might have received some training on what public speaking is all about, what personal branding is all about, what communication is all about. And I will be questioning many of those ideas. So I would love it if you have comments, questions, objections, which you would like to raise, so we can discuss them and clarify what I mean when I question assumptions, and so on and so forth. Okay, so you are absolutely invited to interrupt, raise your hand, ask a question, say you don't agree, and we can have a discussion.
I can say for myself, I took this course because I found it very interesting about learning how to have a nice public speech, and when you're put on the spot to have like a structure of what to think about and not just say just to say something, if you understand.
Yeah.
So to have something in the back, knowledge. So just like this, for example, when you want to tell something and you are able to speak your mouth.
Mm-hmm.
I think is part of the course. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
What my colleague said, I think a lot of us here are from the course International Business, so we expect to do a lot of negotiating, first of all, and maybe we can learn, for example, how to answer questions in the correct manner, how to deflect some questions that we might not want to answer, and overall improve our oratory skills.
Uh-huh. Okay. Anyone else? Confirming the same type of expectations, or perhaps having different expectations?
Kind of, maybe. Because I come come from the tourism branch, so all my life I've been taught that tourism sells fog, and it's a really great type of marketing, because the first word I saw marketing, and then I saw public speaking and general public appearance. I was interested in this workshop because I think it's going to be interesting, and it's going to be like kind of combining how that fog I was taught for the marketing in tourism works with like general marketing.
Okay. Anyone else?
I worked for the past year in the European Parliament, so as you can imagine, there's a lot of public speaking there. So this course is specifically interesting for me because I would like to deepen my knowledge in this.
What else? Nothing else. All right. The title of my lecture today is The Voice as a Tool for Personal Branding. And I will probably disappoint those of you who are here to learn how to answer or deflect questions, or who are here to learn how to package their contents and know what to say when they are on stage, which is frustrating. Hey, wow, why am I here then? I'm here to raise your awareness on a completely different level of communication and to question the way communication and therefore public speaking is usually taught, not because what you are taught is wrong, but because reducing everything to the way you package your contents and manage your Q&A session, answering difficult questions, managing objections in the room, finding the right words, doing your storytelling right, including the right marketing approach in your presentation, and so on and so forth. That's contents. That's language, contents, and it has nothing to do with the voice. The way voice gets sold these days. You get voice on the label, and what you get is marketing, which is also what you are expecting. So you are perfectly in line with the mainstream expectation that during a lecture like this, you will be provided marketing contents and more or less storytelling and audience management techniques. Perhaps self-motivation, perhaps ways of overcoming your fear of public speaking, and so on and so forth, which is all very interesting, but it's got nothing to do with the voice. I'm here to talk about the voice variable, which is a different level of communication. And I hope that after this, you will be able to factor in elements you've never considered before. I've decided to start this by taking the conventional personal branding approach. I suspect you already know what personal branding is all about. And I have chosen to adopt a very mainstream approach to the subject because, as you will see, the mainstream is not necessarily wrong. Although the mainstream often oversimplifies things and drives this process of oversimplification towards things that can be easily marketed, things that can be easily delivered during a workshop. Your personal brand is more or less how you are perceived by others. What's your name?
Tosha.
Tosha. Tosha said you're probably going to do a lot of negotiation during your professional life. If you're negotiating with someone, you have to trust them. Or you have to, even if you don't trust them, you have to sort of appraise what type of person they are. Okay? There's a lot of things you can learn, but there's a lot of gut feelings involved there. And if you are perceived as a credible counterpart, people will treat you differently. Okay, so that's what personal branding could do for you during a negotiation. The day you do your first job interview, you will want to appear to your potential employer like someone trustworthy, competent, skilled, possibly experienced in spite of young age. And the way you come across to your interviewer will play a massive role in the way your interviewer will assess you. So your personal brand is usually defined as the way you are perceived by others. Let me disclose something most people would be embarrassed about, but I'm doing this on purpose. The next few slides have been generated by ChatGPT. I've done that on purpose. The contents have been provided by ChatGPT because one of the things an AI engine can do these days is deliver you the mainstream the way it finds it on the internet. The sort of contents I will treat you to during the next 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes are so mainstream that you can get them from a machine. I will, of course, use them to get you to a completely different place. The reason I'm doing this is because I want you to understand that this type of model and this type of narrative is incredibly standardized. You can get it from any YouTuber. Basic model, a narrative that has been repeated over and over again for the last, say, 30 years. And that ChatGPT can master wonderfully. So you don't need to go and get training for this type of content. You can get them from GPT, sorry. The title of the slide actually means selling yourself as a professional in a highly saturated market, which is what all of you will have to do when you graduate. How many marketing professionals are there around? No, I mean, how many marketing professionals are there right now in Ljubljana?
I consider myself as one. That's why I raise my hand.
Yeah, good. I mean, is it a highly competitive market? Is there a shortage of marketing professionals?
No, I don't think so.
Probably far too many. You will have to find your way and find a way of selling yourself in a highly competitive environment. Why should they pick you? So, in order to do your personal branding properly, according to the mainstream narrative, you will have to identify your values and identity. I have highlighted a number of words in the next few slides, and I invite you to take notes of the words I have highlighted. Because there's a thread linking them. Identity and values means you have to understand who you are, what you stand for, what your core values and distinctive competencies are. You have to know who you are so that you can sell who you are and be able to say, hey, I'm different from everyone else, so pick me. Of course, communication contributes to building your personal brand. Conveying your value through digital channels. Most of this is written stuff and pictures. LinkedIn, blogs, social media, and then comes speaking. Or non-digital channels like networking, events, publications, this is real-life interaction. All of this helps you build a reputation and build credibility. Again, is this person credible? Am I dealing with someone credible? Will they deliver on their promises? If they say something, will they walk the talk? Will they do as they preach? Will they do as they promise? Are they trustworthy? Can I trust this guy? Every transaction that you make, every used car you buy from someone you have to trust. How does that feeling of trust originate? And that is one of the topics I will be discussing with you today. Demonstrating expertise through valuable content, testimonials. And one of the things you have to make sure you achieve is consistency and continuity, maintaining a coherent image over time, both online and offline. Why is this important? Well, because you are living in an increasingly competitive environment and digitalized world. So personal branding will help you to attract job opportunities, collaborations, to build, again, authority and trust, credibility. Create a professional network, improve the market perception of your value. Perception is a huge word. And it's not about selling yourself artificially. The machine is telling you, don't be artificial. Be who you are, be authentic. But about communicating your value authentically, I should have highlighted this, and strategically. Good personal branding allows a professional to be the first choice in their sector, not only for their skills, but also for their impact and reputation. And that's something you have to build. So you can be a very competent negotiator, you can be a very competent marketing expert, but will people perceive you as such? Will people perceive you as a professional? The way you emanate helps build your image, the type of impact you make, not just as a professional, but as a person. Of course, first impressions have a key role to play here. They are formed very quickly. According to some studies, it takes just 7 seconds to make an initial assessment of someone. This is the time when people decide if someone is trustworthy, competent, or interesting. Therefore, in personal branding, your initial presentation is crucial for earning a positive evaluation. Now, this is what the machine generated. According to the literature I've read, first impressions take even shorter to form, around 1.5 seconds. 7 seconds is very generous. And of course, once formed, these first impressions generate a bias. There will be additional interaction to confirm or to question that first impression. But once that first impression is there, working against it is difficult. This is how human psychology works. Self-knowledge, understanding which aspects generate trust and authority. But again, artificial intelligence is basically pointing towards authority, trust, credibility, but linking it to the way you clearly define your mission, values, and distinctive competencies. This is on cognitive and intellectual levels of communication. And of course, this stuff is useful. Nobody's saying that you should not define what you want to convey to an audience, convey to your potential customers, and so on and so forth. But is this the only way authority and credibility and trustworthiness are generated? Yes, the machine is pointing towards the way you talk. And it's also telling you that you should avoid inflating your profile with unreal competencies or experiences, but your profile and your competencies is not the only thing you can inflate. Especially if you are talking about the voice. There's a lot of air that goes into the production of a voice. And I will go into this later on during my presentation. Again, this is the typical stuff you find on the internet and in a classroom when you are discussing personal branding. And here the machine starts talking about you need to use a natural and personal voice. Yes, absolutely. Can you not agree with a statement like that? As a matter of principle, of course, you should be using a natural and personal voice without copying pre-packaged models. Show genuine presence and interaction. But if you go and read the rest, you will see that it's not talking about your voice. It's constantly using voice as a metaphor for something completely different. So participate in discussions, yes, you will use your voice there. Comment, respond to messages in a personal and authentic way. Most of this is written stuff. It's talking about social media. Engaging on social media, conveying a consistent message and an image of yourself on social media and so on and so forth. Again, this is important, yes. But why is it talking about the voice? In what way is this a voice? And should the voice variable play a different role? What the traditional narrative focuses on is visuals and stylistic consistency. Professional image. Curate your professional image on LinkedIn, website and social media. Your website should be properly designed. Your pictures should be professional headshots. When you go to a meeting, make sure you're properly dressed. Make sure you don't stink. Hey, right? Make sure you have makeup or you have shaved. Right? And this stuff is important. I'm, again, not saying it's not. But all this talk about authority, credibility, and so on boils down to visual aspects, written communication, and content packaging. Yet, the machine insists, and it insists on the metaphor of a voice. Yes, again, credibility, authority, reputation by publishing articles or giving interviews or publishing contents. What is important here is not necessarily what you do, but how you do it. And again, how that content is delivered. The how, the qualitative aspect. The content of the message is the what. The tone of voice, hey, the tone of voice. This is a widely used notion in marketing. The tone of voice and style means the how. And the tone of voice is critical. But again, it can be professional, friendly, authoritative, or informal, depending on your audience and personality. And as we go on, we will realize that this mostly has to do with written content. Copywriters. Write your text for your website in order to convey a specific tone of voice. Of course, this comes from the fact that the way you use your voice to deliver your content matters a lot, and it all originates in situations where you are speaking, not writing. So that's where the metaphor comes from. But again, the way the voice variable appears in this type of narrative has very little to do with a real voice. professional. You have to appear professional through pictures. Your layout must be curated. And this conveys reliability and a sense of professionalism. You see a website that is well designed, elegant, and you sort of imagine that the people behind the website, the company, will also be professional. Will also put attention to the detail in what they do for you. Right? That's how it works in human psychology. And hey, I'm not questioning that. Only, I am wondering why this is limited to visual aspects and sort of the way you package written contents. Or the way you package contents for an oral presentation. But again, it's the contents, it's the message. We know, even from the theory of communication, that this is only a limited part of what goes on in human communication. And that's what I'm going to discuss with you today. The machine is now providing a definition of tone of voice. And this one's in red because I so disagree with this definition. But this is the conventional definition, people. The selection of words, the style of communication, and how you deliver your message. It is the linguistic tone. Choice of vocabulary. Again. What's your name again? Nicola. Yeah, that was correctly your expectation. You're absolutely in line with the type of narrative you have been exposed to. The choice of words. Is it technical? Is it formal? Is it friendly, simple, colloquial, or highly academic, scientific, difficult to follow? And again, those are choices. You may want to make those choices specifically because you want to achieve a particular result. Sentence structure, formality level, pace. Am I fast? Am I making pauses? And the linguistic tone of voice is a fundamental element of personal branding because it helps you differentiate yourself and create a bond with your audience. Creating a bond with your audience is absolutely paramount. There's no question about that. Only is it through the way you choose your words and structure your sentences? Yes, perhaps. But again, this is the linguistic side of communication. And communication theory has long established that this is only part, again, of what goes on in human communication. It's not which words you use, but also how you use them. Again, the how factor. The machine knows that the how factor is important, but it still applies it. It keeps applying it to things that are probably 20 or 30% of human communication. And it's not a mistake the machine makes. This is the typical assumption, the typical narrative in personal branding. It says what personal branding coaches say. And there's science behind personal branding. What type of science? Psychology, yes. Mainly cognitive psychology. And again, cognitive psychology is a part, perhaps a limited part, of what humankind has developed in terms of knowledge of how people function in their heads. Communication, linguistics, neuroscience, yes. Neurolinguistic programming was very fashionable when I was at university. It's grown out of fashion right now because other narratives have gained a lot of ground. But that's, yeah, there's neuroscience in neurolinguistic programming, but again, linguistic and cognitive neuroscience. And neuroscience is a much, much broader field of research. And sociology. Again, the goal of this is to work on the way people will perceive you and your message, but the way they will perceive you will create a heavy bias on the way they will perceive and process your message. So the way they perceive you as a person, not just as a professional, you as an entity in the room or in the virtual room or in the virtual space, creates a bias. It means that it sort of governs the way people will process your message. And communication theory established this in the 1970s. The toolbox of personal branding, according to these areas of human knowledge, will typically include the study of emotions and decision-making processes, the study of body language, empathy, very on trend, storytelling, techniques of persuasion, neurolinguistics. This is the type of ingredients which you usually find when you are approaching personal branding and communication these days. And again, this is because most of what you're studying and trying to manage, so to say, is limited to the way you package your message and the way you visually appear to other people. Now, during the 1970s, Albert Merhabian, the father of mainstream communication theory, conducted a number of psychological studies and found that non-verbal elements of communication had a much bigger impact in human communication than people thought. Communication coaches quote Albert Merhabian almost obsessively to this day. And two of his studies have been merged into a sort of magic formula that most communication coaches use and that Albert Merhabian objects to because it's an oversimplification of his research, as very, very frequently happens. I will use his formula. I know it's not 100% accurate, but it still helps us understand how the conventional narrative works and to what extent it is good and important and it has to be borne in mind, and to what extent it should be overcome by something completely different. The way Merhabian gets quoted is words only account for 7% of human communication, the verbal content. Tone of voice accounts for 38%, a nice and precise figure. The rest is body language, 55%. Now, this is probably an exaggeration. And again, Albert Merhabian has questioned this way of summarizing his results and has downsized the impact of tone of voice and body language on overall communication, but let's assume it needs to be downsized and it's down to words account for 40%, 4 times as much, and tone of voice and body language account for, say, 60%. One of them accounts for 30% and the other one accounts for the remaining 30%. Okay? It's still a lot of weight on elements of communication that have nothing to do with the way you pick your words and with the way you organize your content. The conventional marketing-oriented approach is absolutely following this notion in that it is placing its contents, properly arranged contents, in a beautifully designed layout, adding a sort of a visual tone of voice and a sort of visual body language on a website, on a leaflet, and so on. And when coaching someone for a presentation or a negotiation, and when providing advice to a professional on the best way to, design their website or their promotional materials, a lot of effort will go into the visual aspects because they sort of provide the tone of voice and body language. You saw what the machine wrote. According to Albert Merhabian, these are the elements of communication, and they're mostly non-verbal, although, again, the percentages would probably be different. And the problem begins when you have incongruity. It means your contents are going one direction, and your tone of voice and body language are going in different and perhaps opposing directions. People who are listening to your presentation or reading your materials will instantly think, okay, you're saying that your products are well designed, but your website sucks. It's poorly designed. It's not user-friendly. I don't like it. It doesn't give me the right impression. It doesn't look good. But you are, I don't know, selling top-notch design products. Okay? This doesn't register. You're giving two completely different and opposing messages. I do things properly. No, I don't. Okay? And I will absolutely not question that when there's incongruity between these elements, people do not trust you. So there's incongruity in that message, and people will not consider the message because it is at odds with other elements of communication. Now, was Merhabian wrong? Or is he wrong? Because I think he's still alive, hopefully. Well, he was wrong and he was right at the same time, like many researchers. Merhabian had a background as an engineer, and his model is based on cognitive psychology with a sort of an emotional support to it. Words describe the cognitive aspect, the verbal content. They are there to put ideas in your head. They are there to give you instructions, to tell you, please buy this product, or please buy me as a consultant, please buy me, hire me as a marketing specialist, please fund my project, please fund my startup. I am trustworthy. I will pay back my loan and make a ton of money out of it. You will make a lot of money if you fund my company. So that's the impression that's the message you want to give to your potential clients or providers of finance. And it's here. Yes. And it's here. It's in the cognitive verbal dimension. Tone of voice. Now, there are many definitions of tone of voice. Every time I hold one of these lectures or give workshops, I actually find it amusing to ask my participants what their definition of tone of voice is. And I think I will do this later. To Merhabian, tone of voice means prosody. It means the way your voice goes up and down as you are speaking. Because the way your voice goes up and down conveys a number of cues your listeners will use to interpret the meaning of what you're saying. I came to Ljubljana last night on my private jet. Seriously? But you instantly know that I didn't fly here and I didn't use a private jet to come here. On my private jet. Yes. Okay? And that's intonation. Hungry. Hungry? Same word. Two different intonation patterns. Works in every language. There are actually languages in which the way you use your intonation completely changes the meaning of the words you are using. Again, is it a question? Is it a statement? Are you supposed to take my statement seriously? Or am I myself questioning what I'm saying? All right? So, to Merhabian, tone of voice means prosody, which provides the cues to help you make sense of the cognitive and verbal content. So you could say that to Merhabian, tone of voice is a cognitive aspect, or an aspect that basically supports the cognitive engine. Then you have body language, which expresses emotions. Emotions that are used to make sure that the cognitive message gets across as intended. It can be considered a lubricant for the cognitive engine. When you're doing your public speaking, use the right emotions so that people will stay awake, so that people will trust you, so that you will feel the way you feel. Stimulate their empathy on an emotional level. How do you do that? Well, body language, according to this theory. Not only, but body language is supposed to play an important role in this. And to Merhabian, interestingly, body language was facial expressions. What he studied was the way the face moved. Now, this notion has been exported into the world of public speaking to include studies on human body language done by other researchers, and you actually have people going to train corporate executives on the way they should sit, uncross their legs, because that gives a particular message to your audience. Okay, that's the type of body language you're usually talking about when it comes to public speaking. That's not the body language Merhabian investigated. It's an extension. And again, it's there because it's a type of language. Again, it's treated as something that provides interpretative cues. I'm so interested in hearing what you have to say. My words say that I am. My body says I don't want to know. Okay? Is this always true? Honestly, I'm not sure. But even if it were true, and maybe it is true, is it the only form of body language at work during human communication? But to me, the Merhabian model is shallow and lacking because it mainly focuses on the conscious aspects of communication, the ones that the cognitive mind can control. Again, Nicola expected me to provide clear instructions on what to think about when you're talking and how to basically control yourself when you're doing public speaking so that you are capable of doing what you want to do and what is expected of you. So, cognitive things and things your cognitive mind can control, which will typically involve aspects of your brain. Muscles, we heard your name again? Marina. We heard Marina talk about the memory of muscles. Parts of your body you can control. Can you control your liver? Except with the amount of alcohol you provide to it. Can you control your stomach? All right? Can you control your gallbladder? You can't. Okay, there are parts of your body you can control voluntarily, and parts of your body you cannot control voluntarily. But in general, especially given that Merhabian's background was engineering and his field of research was cognitive psychology, he's mainly focusing on aspects that have to do with the conscious mind. And the only part, at least partly unconscious aspect, is emotions, which, in his model, must be prevented from interfering with the process of communication and generating incongruity. So the Merhabian model, so to say, leaves major variables out of the equation, because over the last 120 years, more or less, the founding fathers of European psychology have been discovering and exploring the unconscious mind. Starting with Freud and possibly earlier than that. We all know and take for granted that we have a conscious mind and an unconscious mind. The issue I have with models derived from cognitive psychology is that they accept that the unconscious mind is there because nobody questions that any longer, but they pretend it's doing nothing. Now, if you go and do some research in the field of depth psychology, possibly one of the most interesting things produced in Europe over the last 100 years, you will realize that unconscious aspects of our psyche are constantly at work in human relationships and in communication. And they are absolutely not catered for in these models. This diagram more or less describes Merhabian's model of human communication. You have two conscious minds here, 1 and 2. One is the person speaking, and the other one is the recipient. A message is exchanged. There might be exchange in both directions. And more or less, everything is subject to conscious control when things are working properly, when there's no interference, when you're doing things the way you are supposed to do. So, there's exchange at a cognitive level, words. The speaker will consciously control his or her body language, his or her body language. The speaker will consciously manage his or her tone of voice, which basically means intonation to Merhabian. And both the tone of voice and the body language will provide context for the recipient to interpret the message properly and to process the message properly. Part of this context will be cognitive. Part of this context will be emotional, under the close management and control of conscious aspects of communication. The tone of voice is the sort of melody that I'm using, that I'm putting in the language. So it's a paraverbal aspect. The body language is the dance, the way I move, the way I sort of dance my contents. Almost nothing here concerns unconscious elements. Everything is subject to conscious control. And there's no space for a variable that I will introduce later on during my presentation, timbre. There's melody, so there's pitch, but there's no mention of qualitative aspects of the sound you are making, because all of this is happening while I am exciting the air that separates and connects us. The voice variable that recurs so often in the narrative behind public speaking, but which is hardly ever treated as an independent thing. Now, when the Merhabian model does not work properly, meaning when there's incongruity, what you have is that probably unconscious elements are affecting the tone of voice and the body language. They generate incongruity because they interfere with the verbal message that is being exchanged between two conscious minds. They will probably activate unconscious reactions in the recipient, and that's where communication goes wrong, according to this model. That's where the unconscious becomes active. So, Merhabian's model caters for the unconscious, yes, when things go wrong. In this model, you should be able to keep the unconscious out of the room, exert conscious control over everything you're doing, and things will work out just fine. But is it even possible? Serious psychology has taught us that keeping the unconscious out of the room is usually a very bad idea. Because while it is outside of the room, metaphorically speaking, it does stuff. And that stuff affects what you're doing inside the room. I think a different model could be adopted. But before I take you into that model, I would like to introduce this gentleman here, whose name is Antonio Damasio. He's a Portuguese neuroscientist who has worked his entire life in the United States and has produced some of the most impactful and most frequently cited research on the theory of emotions and decision-making processes. He has worked a lot on the connection between the cognitive engine, the brain, so to say, and the body. And he argues that there's no distinction between the brain and the body, including the parts of your body that you cannot possibly control, because they are outside conscious control. And he interestingly argues that separating the two is a huge mistake that has no scientific ground. And it is a mistake that Europeans started making around 300 years ago. I'm introducing this because emotions are usually a very important topic when you're talking about human communication. But what are they? And because body language is, like I said, a key element in human communication according to conventional communication theory, I think the theory is not wrong. But you really have to define what emotion is, what the body is, and what it is doing, and the type of language it is speaking, in order for you to be able to integrate those elements in your communication. Now, Damasio is wrongly credited as someone who has shed light on emotions and someone who argues that you should pay attention to your emotions. His research is actually much more nuanced, and he actually introduced a clear distinction between emotion and feeling. Because his research has taken him to the layers of the human nervous system that operate autonomously and that are so deep that they are activated before you react emotionally to something. Feeling is what tells you how parts of your organism or the whole of your organism are doing at a given time, moment by moment. The body knows how it is faring. The body knows if it likes the quality of air in this room, if it likes the way you're sitting, if your posture makes you feel light or heavy. The body keeps telling you, keeps providing you with information of this type and much, much more without you even realizing. These are just examples. Damasio calls these feelings homeostatic because they are direct informers and they tell you if the organism is or isn't operating according to homeostatic needs. You will be able to survive if you're not, even if you're not sitting properly, right? But the quality of your posture, not is it correct, is it incorrect, the quality of it, which is a much vaguer notion, tells your system if you can possibly sit like that for the next 5 hours, if you need to start moving, if your vertebral discs are being compressed. And of course we are well trained to ignore all of that. But the information is available. You can ignore it, but somewhere in your mind you know it. It's there and it's telling you something. Feelings owe their existence to the fact that the nervous system has direct contact with both the outside world and the inside world at the same time. It literally touches the organism's interior, everywhere. And it is touched by the interior. In return, it constantly provides your body and brain with a feeling of what's happening to it. I'm introducing these notions because I will provide very practical examples during the course of my presentation. But if you go back to the notion of the unconscious, your psyche has an unconscious, and so does your body. There are things you can do consciously with your body. I'm going to raise this bottle. And I've got lots of things that I'm doing with my body right now, and you are doing with your body right now, that are happening at a level where you don't even know what's happening. You're digesting your food. You're adjusting your posture constantly. You're regulating your breathing based on the amount of oxygen available in the room. And this is absolutely paramount for your ability to survive. Your body is managing this information constantly. And this information is made available to your brain whenever your body is experiencing something, is coming in contact with the outside world. Your body is reacting at a very, very deep level, which is not yet emotional, and providing information on the object you are meeting. In practice, there is little distance between feelings and the things felt. This is a neuroscientist. Feelings are commingled, they're intertwined with the things and the events we feel. To your nervous system, what's happening outside of you is happening inside. Can we reframe communication based on this? And again, what begins to make my mental contents conscious the way I begin realizing what I'm thinking, is identifying myself as the owner of the current mental holdings which are derived from the way my nervous system reacts to things. It reacts to the quality of light in this room. It reacts to the background noise of the PowerPoint projector. It reacts to the sound of my voice. It reacts to the way your chair is pressing against your legs and buttocks. And this information is made available to your brain instantaneously, quickly, unequivocally, no extra reasoning or calculation needed. What this gentleman is basically saying is that there is information that comes across immediately, bypasses the cognitive engine completely, and the emotional reactions as well. It might fuel emotional reactions and inform cognitive processes. Absolutely. And what he argues in his research is that it does so all the time. And the extent to which this sort of reactions from the deeper layers of our nervous system inform our decision-making processes, form continuous series of first impressions. The extent to which our nervous system makes this sort of information instantly available to our emotional and cognitive processes is not fully understood. Actually, it's very understated. Because we tend to think everything happened. We used to think everything happened on a cognitive level. Then some began saying, hey, emotions are important as well. And that's it. We are probably leaving out 70% of what goes on. If you read Damasius' research, it will become clear to you that emotions are probably a reaction to changes of state in your nervous system that occur upstream. They can also react to the way you feel emotionally, yes, because communication works both ways. But there's a lot of information provided to you that shapes your perception. Remember when I told you, make notes of the words you find highlighted in yellow. One of those words was perception, which is absolutely paramount in the way your personal brand works. Other people perceive you in a particular way. And the way other people perceive you creates a huge bias in the way they will process your message and contents. Now, the way people perceive you is heavily informed by these layers of your nervous system, which mainstream personal branding and communication theory neglect, ignore. So emotion is very often a reaction to feeling, where feeling is, again, not emotion. Feeling is the information that comes from the body proper. It is the intermingling of sensory perception and the body's self-awareness. Why? Because the minute the quality of the air is processed by my sensory system, and that information is relayed to the deep areas of my brainstem, very non-cognitive areas of our brain, it instantly mixes with the information coming from inside my body, which is being relayed to the upper layers of the nervous system so that it knows what's happening to the body. There's actually an area in our brain where the nerves receive information from both channels and relay it to the upper layers. So whatever comes to the upper layers is an intermingling of the way the body proper has reacted to a stimulus and the way and the characteristics of that stimulus. Now, this obviously sounds very complex and complicated, but bear with me, and it will boil down to a number of practical reflections later on. I promise. Now, feeling controls our decision-making processes, and it generates emotional response and intuition. I've already mentioned that the brain stem is where the intermingling happens. And it is one of the base layers of our brain. You don't learn a language in your brain stem. You don't feel emotions in your brain stem. But it has a much bigger role in forming your decisions and the way you perceive reality than you would believe. I'm not going to go into detail here, but again, the type of systems this gentleman is busy studying and exploring are the thalamus, the brainstem, the sensory cortex, and the autonomic nervous system. None of these areas of your body are places you can train and learn to control. None of these areas have a muscular memory. They can contribute to creating one, but that's not the language they speak. One particular area of the brainstem, the reticular formation, performs a number of very, very interesting tasks if you think about human communication. It regulates attention and presence, collects and filters sensory information. It modulates attention. Now, you're supposed to spend the next few hours with me. And whether I like it or not, hey, attention will go down. This area of your brain is what decides if you're going to pay attention to the type of sensory input. Sensory input, there's someone talking there. Sensory input that comes from me. It regulates tone, muscle tone, reflexes and posture again. One of the things public speaking coaches will insist on, hey, adopt the correct posture. You're addressing an audience. Should you be correcting your posture, or should that area of your brain be given a chance to do its job? But that's a completely different way of looking at it. It performs a number of autonomic functions like controlling your heart rate, managing stage fright. When you're under stress, fear of public speaking, your heart rate increases. Respiration and blood pressure. It modulates pain, and that's less relevant to our topic here. It performs sensory integration. It collects, processes, and unifies sensory inputs before relaying them to the upper areas of your brain. Why? Because our brain has a gating function. The gating function occurs in this area of the brainstem. What's a gating function? You're sitting in a room, there's background noise, there's light, air is becoming heavy, you're hungry, you've got someone sitting next to you who's moving or possibly stinking or maybe wearing perfume. So you've got lots of sensory input. But you're attending my workshop and you've even decided that you're interested. So you want to focus on what I'm saying. Or you've just received a message on your smartphone and you want to focus on the message from your smartphone because that's your next date. And hey, that's interesting. Okay? Fair enough. Where do you do this? You do this there.
So basically it is possible to control. I am in control of my focus. If I decide to listen to you, I can close myself.
All right, yes. You can cognitively decide that that's what you want to be focusing on, but the way you do it goes through this area. It also performs cranial nerve regulation. Wow, what is this? Well, it controls all the nerves that leave the brainstem and go supply things like your throat, your face, your tongue, your larynx, your vocal cords, your guts. So if you're talking about the voice, this is an area of your nervous system you have to pay attention to, especially if you are doing public speaking, for instance. Your ability to retain attention has to do with your ability to interact with this area of your listener's brain as directly as possible. It could be indirect interaction, or it could be direct interaction. Now, neuroscience is studying this, and it has studied this for the last 30 years, although most of this has not made it into the mainstream yet. Now, the studies I was quoting here, they date back to the 1990s. That psychology has reached similar conclusions, and it did so 100 years ago, more or less. This particular gentleman is one of the fathers of European psychology. He was a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, Carl Gustav Jung. And he was talking about the somatic unconscious, which at that time he wrongly defined as probably the sympathetic nervous system. There's much more to that. He was right, but that was just part of it. And he was constantly looking for ways of interacting with those processes inside what he called the human psyche, but the human psyche is more or less the result of the activity of a human nervous system. It's hard to separate one from the other. Now, a lot of science, a lot of neurology, a lot of complicated stuff, and all of that to reframe the question, how is trust generated? If you want to be perceived as a credible and trustworthy professional or potential employee, well, these people have to trust you. What do we do when we meet someone? This is a very irrational thing people do when they meet. Why do I say irrational? Well, because there's no rational reason why you should shake hands. Rational. Right? Can you please shake hands with your neighbor?
So what about the saying, always give a good old firm handshake that old people use?
I would say that there is a reason, and the reason lies in the question, what does this person feel like? When shaking hands, I'm touching someone. I'm forming a haptic impression. I'm giving my body proper, so to say, information of what this other animal, so to say, feels like. When people are kissing when they meet, they are smelling each other and touching each other in very sensitive areas. The skin of your cheeks is a sensitive place. You go near, you touch them, you feel them. Why do we need that? Why do we do that? There are similar ways of doing this in every culture. You go feel the other person. When you buy a used car, have you ever bought a used car? How long have you spent talking with the previous owner? 10 minutes. Did you buy the car? Yes. Good. Now, most used cars get sold after 10 minutes. You talk to the person, you form an impression. Is this person trustworthy? And how was the car treated? Now, shaking hands basically provides information on the amount of pressure people put in what they do. If they're squeezing your hand, maybe they haven't treated that car particularly well. And again, this is a rational interpretation. I'm not saying this is what goes on in your brain exactly, but you feel that person. Can you trust? You have to trust the person to buy the car.
Maybe we should kiss each other.
Well, kissing each other is another way of going near someone and acquiring physical information. Again, you're touching and you're also smelling the person, which is a very underrated way of understanding someone. So can I trust this guy? Trust begins, or is definitely supported by the way that thing, in this particular case another human being, feels to you. That type of information will be fed into the submerged areas of your decision-making processes. And again, science comes to help here. The Liebe experiment famously demonstrated that people who are asked to make a decision start and to implement it. It could be when you see a green dot appear on screen, fetch the bottle and pour water. What they measured during this experiment was that the neural circuitry needed to perform the required action activated before the decision-making centers having been activated. Decisions get made in areas that are not the same areas that activate when we realize that that decision has been made. It means that the body and the brain are making a decision somewhere, and then that decision becomes conscious after it has been made. Which would be very much in line with a lot of the things we know from depth psychology. So that information is fed into areas of your brain that have a huge role to play in your decision-making processes. You shake hands with someone, and instantly you are deciding whether or not you will do business with them. Whether or not the counterpart can be trusted. Whether you're investing your time or wasting your time with that particular person. Now, I mentioned depth psychology, and that's where I have derived this particular model from, which I will now apply to human communication. This is a model that attempts to integrate these submerged aspects of both the psyche and the body, the unconscious dimensions of both the mind and the body, which, as neuroscience teaches and ancient practices, if you look to China, Japan, Buddhism, Taoism, well, they have known that for thousands of years. The body and the mind cannot and should not be treated as two separate entities. Now, this model describes the type of communication that goes on between a psychoanalyst and their patient. There's conscious communication, remember? Conscious communication between two different people. So yes, there's conscious communication between the analyst and the analysant, the client, the patient. At the same time, both the analyst and the patient, are in communication with themselves, with the unconscious aspects of their psyche. And this model was developed for the psyche only. And I think it needs integrating. The body must be there as well. So the analyst and the analysand are in contact with their own unconscious. The individual unconscious of the analyst and the analysand are communicating with one another. This is what they observe during sessions, because they can acquire information and they have no idea how they know that the patient has or hasn't done a particular thing. And at the same time, the conscious mind of the analysand is talking to the unconscious mind of the analyst and the other way around. So you have many directions there. This particular model can be integrated and enhanced by adding the somatic dimension to it, the body. Why am I doing this? Well, because everyone's, so to say, obsessed with body language in communication, and they probably are right. But when you're talking about body language, you really have to understand how the body works and that there is an unconscious dimension to what the body does. Now, if you add the psyche and the psychological and somatic ego consciousness and the psychological and somatic unconscious, all of these dimensions are communicating with one another, and the somatic unconscious is doing many things that keep the communication going between myself and you. They can be catastrophic, they can be disastrous, they can be very useful. And most of them are outside our ability to exert conscious control, but not outside our ability to integrate them in our communication and to mind the fact that they are there. So becoming aware of their presence and of the type of manifestations they usually take. Now, if we go back to communication and we take a much more evolved version of the Mehrabian model, we still have words and a verbal message and contents consciously exchanged by a psychological, conscious complex, so to say. Call it the ego with no negative moral judgment. It's become a very difficult word to use, but it technically means the conscious levels of your mind. The external, voluntary body language, the way you gesticulate, you can become aware of that and even use it to make sure that your point comes across, to make sure that you're attracting visual attention. It can become an art. I'm not arguing that it is not useful. So you have things you can manage and control, like your rhythm, your intonation. You can train them. And of course you can prepare the type of contents and the type of choice of words. And these levels are communicating with one another. Both the psychological and somatic dimensions of your ego can exchange with the unconscious levels of your psyche and your body. An interaction occurs on all levels. Now, the voice variable begins here. And it has a conscious dimension that takes the shape of words. You can shape your words. You can decide what language to speak. You can correct your pronunciation when it's wrong, right? This is all very conscious. You can manage your rhythm, you can hone it, you can improve it, you can manage your intonation. And to a certain extent, you can affect your timbre. Your timbre being the type of sound, the quality of sound that comes out of you. I will now change my timbre. I will now change my timbre. Okay? I can make a decision and do that. But there's a lot your unconscious body and psyche contribute in terms of mainly your timbre. They can affect the type of choice of words you have. Psychologists thrive on that. Yes, but you see, you keep using this particular word, which tells me that you have a problem with your father. Okay? Stereotypically. It might affect your rhythm, it might affect your intonation. Clinical psychologists and therapists are very interested in that. They hardly ever assess this, which is where your somatic unconscious is king. Now, the Merhabian model is the tip of this iceberg. What I'm trying to describe to you using this model is the rest of the iceberg. And the rest of the iceberg is obviously there whenever you're communicating with someone. It could be it a friend, be it a potential client, be it someone you're pitching, or someone you're teaching or addressing in public. Now, going back to Merhabian, was he wrong? Was he right? Well, he was wrong and right at the same time. He focused a lot on facial expressions. Well, facial expressions are managed by the 5th and 7th pair of cranial nerves, the same that supply your middle ear muscles. So you could say that there's an auditory dimension to body language. If you focus on facial expressions only, you're focusing on something that interacts with nerves that also supply your ear. These nerves are stimulated when you listen to something. Information travels through the same channel and excites the same nerve pathways that you're activating when you see changes in facial expressions. So body language, facial expressions, yes, but at the same time those nerves will react to auditory cues as well. Sound. Is there body language in sound? That's what I'm trying to drive this conversation. Now, before we take a break, I would like to ask you what your definition of tone of voice is. You've seen one. Merhabian's definition of tone of voice was intonation. Changes in pitch. Pitch is what changes when you are changing note on a piano. Dong, dong. Okay, these are two different notes. One is low, the other one's high. So to Merhabian, tone of voice is what the Germans call Sprachmelodie, the way your voice forms tiny little melodies when you speak. Is it going up? Is it going down? It forms melodies when you speak. And I'm concluding this. When you speak, and it goes down because it signals that I'm done saying what I was saying. Okay? To Merhabian, that's tone. Now, if you ask 10 different voice coaches, you will get 10 different definitions of tone of voice. So what's tone of voice to you before we take a break?
I'd say it's more like a key of the song.
Resume, and let's see if the contents of my slide pretty much summarize the short brainstorming session we did on what the tone of voice is. This is the type of answers you usually get. Pitch, prosody, which is the answer you will get from Merhabian. Intensity, loud or soft. None of you, well, what's your name again? Yours? Yes. Masha. Masha mentioned something that has to do with timbre. The type of sound that particular person will make, usually. What that person usually sounds like. Someone mentioned pace, rhythm, more or less, amounts of pauses you make. What I forgot to include in the slide is emotions. This is an answer I get pretty frequently, and it basically summarizes the idea that when I listen to someone's tone of voice, whatever it means, I know what they are experiencing in terms of emotions. And we've had, what's your name? Sarah. And Sarah explained that more or less you can know what sort of emotional state a person is by judging it by the tone of their voice. I can subscribe to that statement, although I would change it slightly. And that's what I'm about to do. Now, until I think 3 or 4 years ago, after proposing a short brainstorming session on what tone of voice actually means, and receiving answers more or less in line with the type of answers you have provided, I used to give this type of answer. Well, I will now explain what tone of voice means, and the answer is absolutely nothing. Why? Because tone of voice does not describe anything you would usually describe in a sound. You can describe sounds in terms of pitch, intensity, timbre, perhaps duration. They are scientific categories to describe sounds. Ask a musician what the tone of violin is. They will go like, what? What's the tone of guitar? What's the tone of trumpet? So why should voice have a tone? And I would usually say this is a generic expression. Many voice professionals, especially in the public speaking domain, use, and all of them have a different definition of it, and most of them don't even know what the definition is. They just use the term, and everyone keeps using this term, but it means absolutely nothing. And then, after saying this, I would have moved on to explain what, to me, is much more interesting in terms of understanding how a voice functions. And then, one day, while I was about to say, it means absolutely nothing, people, I had an epiphany. You know, like the Blues Brothers, guy who sees the light? Like one of those moments. It does mean something. I had known this all along, but I had never sort of, joined the dots and said, yeah, that's what it means, actually. In order to understand what tone has to do with the voice, you have to understand the neurophysiology of the voice, just even in very simplified terms. The generation of a voice involves the activity of lots of membranes, muscles, tendons that need to be activated and supplied with the correct tone, nervous system tone, to generate the correct tension. So this stuff, the stuff that you see here on your slide, needs toning so that it can produce a vibration and a sound. If the nervous system tone is not correct, or something interferes with that tone, then people can hear it. And exactly how well those areas of your body are toned translates in the type of hallmark, footprint, so to say, your voice comes with. And we are talking about vagal tone. The tone of your vagus nerve, cranial nerve number 10, the main pillar of the parasympathetic system, which is a division of the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system has traditionally 2, some say even 3 divisions. One of them is the sympathetic division, the one that manages stress. The one that manages the fight or flight reactions. The gazelle and the lion. Okay, you've heard the story before. The gazelle sees the lion, is frightened by the lion, runs for its life. And it has to react to a real and perceived threat to save its life. That's where the sympathetic nervous system comes in. It's a function we need for our survival. The other main division of the autonomic nervous system is the parasympathetic division, the one that regulates the rest and digest functions of our organism. Now, it so happens that your vocal cords are supplied by this little guy here. The parasympathetic dimension of your autonomic nervous system. And I'm basically saying 2 things that can be very disruptive to the way voice is usually taught. First, your vocal cords are managed by the autonomic nervous system. The same system and the same division of that system that regulates the activity of your inner body, your inner organs, your intestines, your stomach, your gallbladder, your liver, your kidneys, your lungs. But this means that the idea of training it becomes very, very difficult. Or maybe that's not the best solution. Can you train a horse? Yes, you can. Will the horse like it? Not necessarily. Will that be sustainable for the horse? The voice is mainly supplied by the part of your autonomic nervous system that has to do with rest and digest, regeneration, recharge. It doesn't like stress. There is one particular intrinsic laryngeal muscle that is innervated by the sympathetic division. It is very used and perhaps overused by singers, most of whom tend to develop voice problems. Ask me why. Now, these tiny little structures, mucous membranes, ligaments, muscles, both voluntary and involuntary, all need the right nervous system tone. So that's what tone has to do with the voice. I was very intrigued by what happened during the final debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, a debate after which Joe Biden had to give up his bid and the idea of running for a second term. His own sponsors were making phone calls to the Democratic Party headquarters saying, "I will not finance this guy." And you know better than I know that without huge amounts of money, you will never be able to run for president in the US. I read that a few hours after that debate, the people who have inherited Disney, tiny little company, were announcing that they were withdrawing their funding from his campaign. Commentators have focused on the fact that Biden was making mistakes and being confused. But I was attracted to the debate because one of the commentators wrote that Biden had apparently lost his voice, or he had a voice problem. So I became very interested. Having listened to the entire debate, I wouldn't say that Biden did poorly in terms of what he said. I think he was very prepared. He had counter-arguments. He was prepared to counter what Donald Trump said and would say, typically. So I don't think that's where he lost. Everybody knew that he was old and that he was prone to having embarrassing moments every now and again. But suddenly an entire nation woke up to the fact that the man's too old and probably can't cope. He's probably sick. Not good for the job. Not fit for the job. Not fit. Now, his competitor was almost as old as he is. So, on a rational level, this makes no sense. Both gentlemen were, well into their 70s. You usually retire at that age. Okay, so the question was there for both. But I think the reason why one came out of the debate as definitely too old, definitely not fit for the job, in spite of the better quality of his arguments, was Biden. Listen to him and try not to focus on what he's saying, but how he comes across.
In fact, I just won 2 club championships, not even senior, 2 regular club championships. To do that, you have to be quite smart, and you have to be able to hit the ball a long way.
Look, I'd be happy to have a driving contest now. I got my handicap, which when I was vice president, down to a 6. And by the way, I told you before, I'm happy to play golf if you carry your own bag. The crimes that you are still charged with, you think of all the small things.
Here's what I'll do. Just listen to it. Don't even look at it.
How many billions of dollars do you owe in civil penalty for molesting a woman in public, for doing a whole range of things, of having sex with a porn star on the night while your wife was pregnant? I mean, what are you talking about? You're in the morals of an alley cat.
We are very, very close to World War III, and he's driving us there. And Kim Jong-un and President Xi of China, Kim Jong-un of North Korea, all of these, Putin, they don't respect him, they don't fear him, they have nothing going with this gentleman, and he's going to drive us into World War III.
You want a World War III. Let him follow and win, and let Putin say, do what you want, NATO.
The whole country is exploding because of you.
Forget what they're saying. Which one of these gentlemen is alive? Alive? Trump. They don't respect him. They don't respect him.
Because they don't respect you, and they have to respect their president, and they don't respect you throughout the world.
Just listen to him again. Ask yourself, is this man healthy? Is he fit for a stressful job? Is he fit for a challenging task?
Maybe it's not really the voice.
No, I know. He was probably under the effect of medication. Probably. And the type of medication that affects your nervous system tone. Look what happens to the voice.
Joe Biden.
That's how I explain it. He was awake. And if you follow what he's saying, he was not in a confusional state. Absolutely. He's actually using better arguments than Trump. Well, he had prepared this thoroughly. So he's prepared his presentation. He's got public speaking coaches helping him since he began his activity as a politician. He's the president of the US. He can get the best public speaking advice money can buy. And his accent wasn't a problem. His pace wasn't a problem. Maybe a bit faster than needed, yes, possibly. But that's again a consequence of the type of nervous system mood he's in. That's what's driving his communication. And it's clear and manifest in his voice.
We're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID. With dealing with everything we had to do with. Look.
Yeah. Okay. Embarrassing moment now, but
we finally beat Medicare. I went to the World War II cemetery, World War I cemetery.
Is this man making an effort?
No, but can we judge him for that? How much of it is just because of his health? Yeah, they're both old, but some condition is much worse. We can take, for example, on the other side, Bernie Sanders. They're the same age, maybe even older than Trump, but he's more energetic.
Yes.
It comes down to what you're passionate about.
Yeah.
And know how to rally.
Yes, energetic. Interesting. Energetic. Trump is energetic here. Bernie Sanders would have been more energetic. Absolutely. Usually, when you hear him talk. But at this particular time, it was very, very clear from his voice that he was not energetic enough. But did he put very little effort in what he was doing? He was trying very hard.
He was also more deflecting rather than attacking.
Yes, but I would listen to the voice. What is the voice telling you? I'm putting a lot of effort in what I do, and I get nothing out of it. And I'm trying to squeeze something out of my voice, and it won't come. And after a couple of hours, people are withdrawing funds from your campaign. That's just how important this is. They all knew that he had problems, but they had not withdrawn any funds. That's when it happened. Let me resume this. Oops. Now, so what's tone to do with the voice? Tone is what you can desume from timbre. And timbre is the type of sound a thing, so to say, will make when excited. Timbre is what helps you distinguish a violin from a trumpet when they're playing exactly the same note or the same music. You instantly know that one is a violin and another one's a trumpet, right? Although they're doing exactly the same stuff. because they sound different. So, Masha, was that? Yeah. The typical sound that particular person or thing will make when set in vibration. And it carries the unconscious body language of the inner organs and nervous system. It is the result of unspecific background tone. It manifests what we are on the inside. You can all see what Biden does on the outside, and you've seen it dozens of times. But suddenly you know that there's something wrong with him on the inside. And this is a particularly clear case. Okay? Usually it's subtler, but it's there. Timbre tells you what a voice consists of. It is the quality of the way your voice moves, stands, and how diversified its structure is. It is its posture. I can have a posture, I can have another posture, but my voice can retain its posture. I can have excellent posture, and my voice has very bad posture. Okay? So the posture of your, so to say, nervous system, one of the way it manifests is your voice, is the timbre of your voice. And this element is 100% non-verbal. It's not cognitive. It does not convey any linguistic information. It is connected with emotion, but it is not emotional in itself. It is a quality derived by the overall tone of your nervous system. So the state you're in. So the tone of voice is found in timbre. It reflects the tone of your nervous system while you're doing something. And tone of voice and body language are basically one and the same thing. Because the tone of your voice reveals the body language of your nervous system and inner organs. It's internal, not external. But it basically tells nervous systems what that other sort of animal feels like, because hearing is touching. The way the auditory system works is it sort of touches the impression left by something that has been set in motion in the surrounding air. I like to explain this with a bronze cast of one of the most beautiful artifacts of the history of humankind. If you travel to Berlin, Alte Galerie, I think that's where it is kept, you've got the head of Nefertiti. This beautiful funerary head of what must have been a beautiful woman. I mean, she was represented as a very, very beautiful woman. And of course you cannot touch the wooden head. But they have a bronze cast for the visually impaired, so that they can touch and feel what she looked like. This is what blind people do, right? And when you're listening to something, that's what your brain is doing. It's basically touching a virtual bronze cast of of how the thing that is making a sound is behaving in order to make that sound. You're basically acquiring a three-dimensional scan of the internal configuration of a person. Talk about shaking hands. While listening to me, you are shaking hands. Your nervous system is shaking hands with mine. And it's been doing so for the last 2 hours. Not bad. Maybe too long. This happens below the waterline of consciousness, here. And the type of information it conveys is funneled straight into the brainstem. Remember, where those areas that govern arousal, vigilance, attention, wakefulness, even states of alarm, and sensory gating are located. It basically means that these are the elements that might play a decisive role in making sure that people want to listen to you because I can package my contents as good as I can. I can be the best possible public speaker in terms of the way I do my storytelling. But I cannot force you to listen. There's no way. It doesn't work. But there might be something in the way I do it that keeps your nervous system awake and connected. There are two ways of doing this. One is provoking a sense of alarm. And this is something actors do very often. They do something very conspicuous. Hey, and I had forgotten. Hey, suddenly everyone's listening because I'm causing you alarm. So your system reacts. But there's only a certain amount of times I can do this, because after a while, your nervous system will start hating me because I'm putting it under stress. Then at the same time, it will tune out. Because, hey, unnecessary alarm, unnecessary alarm, unnecessary alarm. Don't listen. Or there might be something in the way I do it, and in the way this type of information comes across to your nervous system, by perceiving the tone of voice and therefore the body language of someone who's speaking to you, or when other people perceive your tone of voice and body language in the sound of your voice, in the timbre of your voice, they instantly know, remember instantly and directly, when I was talking about neuroscience, they instantly know how much of yourself you are making available to other people. Confidence usually emerges where people have nothing to hide or are not hiding information. Can you trust someone if you realize on some level that they're hiding stuff from you, that they are withholding information from you? This type of information also signals proximity. It means it signals to your brain how near I am to you right now. And of course I can be 15 meters away, but if there's something in the timbre of my voice that gets to your nervous system even from this distance, your nervous system will perceive me as closer to you. And people tend to listen to the advice of other people they let go near them. Proximity is something people enjoy. If certain aspects of my timbre are present enough and get to where you are without you having to be here, suddenly I become more credible. That's the type of information you would receive from someone near you, someone you allow very near. Family, someone you know. You don't know me, but maybe I sound like someone you would know. Maybe not, but on certain levels, this might sort of provide the same type of information. Through the way I'm speaking right now, and through the type and quality of sound that I'm making, through the way I'm exciting air in this room, I am providing you with information on the way I treat my own body tissues. Do my vocal cords clash against each other when I speak? Or do they gently touch each other? How much pressure do I need in my lungs to do this? How much do I have to push? You know. You knew when you were listening to Biden. You instantly knew. You know much less when you're listening to me, but something in you knows instantly. So basically, by listening to someone's voice, our nervous system shakes hands with the nervous system of the person who's producing that voice, and we instantly know what it feels to be that person. That's a wealth of information, if you think about it. Especially over the type of information your brain will process in the back of your mind and will inform the decisions you think you're making in the higher layers of your brain. Now, timbre answers the question, who or what is asking me to marry him? Is it a frog or is it a prince? How do you know the words are the same? Will you marry me? He's saying the exact words. He's kneeling. He's got a crown. But something says it's not a prince, it's a frog. And that type of information is in timbre, which conveys both the tone behind that voice and the real body language inside that person. So when there's a discrepancy between the words and the body language, yes, and the tone of voice, yes, people tend not to trust you. You lose credibility. Your personal brand is diminished. So Merhabian was right, but I would question his definition of tone of voice and body language, and perhaps say that it needs to be broadened big time, or bigly, to quote the guy who won the election. Do we have research that confirms this? Well, we do. During the pandemic, the world started communicating through video conferencing platforms. Many people started realizing that it just sucked. A number of theories started emerging on the reasons why people didn't like it and why people experienced Zoom fatigue. Most of those theories were cognitive and based on the lack of visual cues and the lack of body language. Surprise, surprise. Some people, including myself, went straight to a completely different factor. Sound quality. Voice quality. Now, I've got two teams of researchers here, and both came to the same conclusion. The people who appeared before an audience on video and had a comparatively poorer sound quality were receiving a lower score in terms of their credibility. One study was conducted in Australian courts. Witnesses appearing in video conference, if their sound was poor, their credibility was assessed lower than that of witnesses that were appearing with a better sound quality. And one other very interesting study gave an audience of scientists, I think it was engineers, recorded presentations of fellow engineers who were proposing their research. You usually have a study group and a control group. So one group was provided with a high quality sound version of that presentation, and a study group was given a degraded sound quality version of the same presentation. So you had exactly the same contents. You had exactly the same person, same presentation, same content, same accent, pace, rhythm, pitch, intonation, everything stays the same. The only variable was timbre. The people who had to assess the presentations delivered with a degraded timbre found that the researchers were less credible and that their research was less interesting. The other traditional elements of public speaking were there. But go and degrade the quality of timbre, credibility goes down the drain. Why? That's a quote from one of the from one of these scholars. As soon as we reduce the audio quality, all of a sudden, the scientists and their research lost credibility.
What does that tell us exactly?
Well,
because it's not like they wanted to have that quality.
No.
In the real world, it's limitations, it's money, it's funding. Scientists, for example, it doesn't matter if it's the scientists or the people in the courtroom. If those are the limitations for speaking, if they don't have a good mic or whatever, that's the real world. I mean, they can't change it. Yes, of course, we know that I'll be perceived more truthful, or what I say, people take it to heart, or I don't know, trust me. But if I have the funding to do it, then I'll do it. If I don't, that's that.
Oh, yes, yes. Actually, in order to do it properly, the funding you need is ridiculously low. And that's something I will discuss later on. But this tells us that the timbre variable has an impact on your credibility. It has a negative impact when you degrade it actively. And in this particular study, it was actively degraded. So, hey, not the speaker's fault, right? But it also shows you that a well-honed timbre can give you a competitive advantage. If it works one way, why should it not work the other way? I have a lot of experience of the fact that it works both ways. Improve that timbre and credibility goes up. Degrade it, credibility goes down. This was confirmed by another couple of interesting pieces of research. One actually managed to measure stress reactions after the exposure to a 40-minute lecture in video conference mode. They used a standard Zoom quality, where the timbre is degraded by the way the platform processes the input. And contrary to a widespread thinking, not by the internet. It's actively degraded because it goes through AI filters to remove background noise. It gets you rid of the noise, but it perverts your voice. And it does something with the nervous system of the people who are listening. In this particular case, researchers could measure stress reactions. If you consider this research, which is much older, and went into the actual characteristics of degraded microphone signals. Loudness, which doesn't necessarily mean intensity. And bad microphone. Microphones that do not sound particularly well. They don't sound good, they sound artificial. And loudness is what these days you achieve on phones by manipulating basically the spectrum so that you concentrate acoustic energy in areas where your ear is particularly sensitive. You might have noticed that on the internet, voices often sound tinny and metallic. Sometimes muffled. They don't sound natural. You understand the words, but that's not exactly the voice of that particular person. It's a manipulated version of that voice. Of course, it becomes more audible, but it becomes aggressive to your nervous system. Can you hear then? Yes, absolutely. Can you feel it if someone is punching you in the nose? Yes, you can feel it. But that's painful. You don't like that. These researchers actually showed that that type of audio degradation does not trigger a conscious reaction in study subjects. They don't complain. They think there's nothing wrong with it. But a stress reaction can be measured. So the nervous system is reacting to that type of signal, and it's reacting as it would react when faced with a threat. That's the way a natural voice will be represented on a spectrogram. That's the way more or less the same voice gets altered by these systems. Now, what's interesting here is that this is degradation at timbre level. It doesn't change the words you're saying. It doesn't change your accent, intonation. It doesn't change your storytelling. It doesn't change anything. But it goes straight into the nervous system of the people who are listening to you. And that nervous system doesn't like it. It means that the nervous system is reacting to the quality of the sound it's receiving. And now if we go back to our personal brand topic and go back to one of the most widely quoted definitions of a personal brand, it is a perception or emotion, interesting, maintained by somebody other than you that describes the total experience of having a relationship with you, of having to do with you. What does it feel like to have to do with this particular person? Now, if you read this quote in the light of what I have been discussing so far, you probably start realizing how many aspects need to be taken into account when saying it is a perception or an emotion, which is a reaction to what you're perceiving, that describes the overall experience of having to do with a person. Now, voice and marketing and tone of voice. Voice is not the main course in a public speaking training program. You hear a lot about the voice, but most of it, like we saw earlier on today, is a metaphor. Voice becomes the style of your writing. The tone of voice becomes the way you've designed your website. It's got nothing to do with the real voice. If you have an 8-hour workshop on public speaking, you will probably talk about the voice, for the real voice, the actual voice, for about 1 hour. It will typically be a couple of breathing exercises, recommendations like do not forget to drink abundantly, drink a lot of water, because that will moisten your vocal cords. If water reaches your vocal cords, you choke. So should the voice be molded according to conventional marketing narratives? And there, neuroscience and psychology come to help again. We have scientific evidence of the fact that when you are faking it, other people realize on a subconscious level. And that faking a smile, even a smile, is a very complicated business. Very few people can do it, even in the entertainment industry. There are different schools in drama that try to bypass this problem by teaching people, and actors in particular, how to really recall real emotions so that they can be credible when they want to convey emotions, which involves a tiny little problem. Emotional recall involves a number of risks from a psychological point of view. So actors who have been working that way have found that it's heavy. So that's not sustainable either. You can represent emotions, you can pretend that you're not nervous. You can pretend that you're happy, you can pretend that you're having an emotion that you want to convey to your audience. But deep down inside they know that it's not real. So again, going back to Merhabian, incongruity. Now imagine you have to sell something. The famous used car, or something else. Your company, your startup. Are you real? Are you authentic? Remember what the machine says? You have to be authentic. Don't fake it. And yet the type of advice you usually get is learn how to fake it. Learn to use your body language. But what body language? Is it the external body language? Is it the internal body language? And what type of body is speaking what type of language? The areas of your body you can control, or are we going to interact, because we can't avoid doing it, with the areas of your body and nervous system that you can't possibly control? Do they also have legitimacy in the process? Are they involved, or are they being repressed somewhere, and suddenly they will pop up again and disrupt the process? So what sounds and feels credible? What sounds trustworthy? And how do you define inconsistency? How can you possibly be authentic? How should you work on your voice in a way that keeps your voice authentic and keeps it working in a way that comes across as natural, spontaneous. And at the same time, doesn't sound shaky, and it doesn't consume your voice. When you're a trainer, and when you have to speak a lot, that's fatiguing. But like I said, do you hear fatigue in my voice? Do you perceive that I'm making a particular effort to get to the bottom of the room? And again, I'm not using a microphone. And again, that's how much water I've had since 1 o'clock. Did I sleep a lot last night? Not exactly. When you travel a lot, you don't get much sleep. That puts your system under stress. And your voice usually pays a price for that. But you don't get to hear it now. Why? Because I've never tried to train my voice. I've gone about this in a completely different fashion. Who's this guy here? This guy is a very famous Italian. One that I'm very proud of. He's a physicist. One who won a Nobel Prize a few years ago, 2022, for his work on complex systems. This guy has studied the way systems self-organize without anyone telling the system what it should do. Now, your voice is an incredibly complex system. In order to produce it, you have to mobilize many different areas of your brain, many different layers, including the cognitive, the emotional, but not just those. The motor level, voluntary and involuntary. You have to ride that horse and respect the fact that it's a horse at the same time. It's not a machine. You can't tell the horse what to do when. It has to agree. And you have to respect the way a horse moves. You can't expect and demand that the horse moves like a leopard or a Mercedes. Okay, a horse will be a horse. And the interaction between all of these elements is an incredibly complex process. One that involves autonomic components of your nervous system. So components that you cannot possibly control. And that's why, and that's where complexity science comes in handy. You can go about your voice and you can start interacting with these phenomena by learning, so to say, to speak the language of complexity and understanding the way they want, and they try all the time to self-organize. I will devote the entire session tomorrow to showing you why these models are interesting and how they can be applied to the voice.